All right, good morning out there, the fans of the Undead Viking Show. I have a special treat today. Yes, we are having our normal live stream that we normally have on Wednesday evenings, but I was contacted by the people over at Frog God Games and by Matt Finch himself, the man that is standing here, the well-bearded gentleman, to talk about the Swords and Wizardry rule set, which is currently going on in Kickstarter right now for I think it's the first time ever, like box sets of the game, right?
Yeah, it's the first time that that I've ever been part of a box set thing. There was one for the white box that came out a long time ago. A guy named John Adams of Brave Halfling Press, but that was for white box. This is the first one for Swords and Wizardry Complete. That's a box set.
Is that like that's got to be a huge collector's item at this point, then, right?
Yeah, it is, except for the one thing that nobody knows exactly how many of them were made, but yeah, it's a collector's item. I think he sold them for $50 a piece, and they're selling on eBay for about 200 now.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, does Zach have one? This is totally. You gotta assume Zach has one.
I assume Zach has one. Yeah.
Zach owns everything. He tracks. Zach Glazer is a person that works with Frog God and a designer and writer of his own right, but I've seen pictures of his encyclopedic archive of RPGs. So
yep.
That's neither here nor there. Matt, you guys are running a Swords and Wizardry. I know that when this happens, it's when you need to reprint the books because you run out. This is
right.
Usually what happens. I know you guys released like that really cool, like purpley, pinky, like kind of, I don't know, weird looking cover. And for the last time,
is that the
that's the original
one we're
right?
talking about?
Yeah, I shouldn't say original.
Yeah. Well, I ran an online game
yesterday.
The
one that had the purple. Okay, let me see. You're going to dig it out? Yeah, I'm sure you have it right there.
Yeah, the one with the black cover. This one, that one.
Yeah, that one. And what is that supposed to be? Anyway, I've always wondered what that's supposed to be.
I don't know. I mean, there's a deer in the middle of it and a rib cage, but it's a little more abstract than the Aerolotus cover, which, as it turns out, what we've got left that we're having to replace is actually still those Aerolotus ones, but Bill Webb, who's the CEO, is not really great at inventory management, and so we were working with Paizo on they were selling some of the books for us, and when that contract expired, we discovered that we had sent them a couple of hundred of the Aerolotus cover books, and so we had those actually outlasted the other one. So that's what we've got right now. That's what we're running out of. And we got together and we said, okay, we've been doing a lot of stuff where the Swords and Wizardry products kind of look like the 5th edition products. It's there are certainly advantages to using the same art in 2 editions of stuff because it means you're not paying twice for art. There's very similar appearance, and we were like, okay, let's differentiate the Swords and Wizardry stuff a little bit from the other things that we're doing, because this is actually our product rather than being a third-party publisher for stuff. So let's do it upright. And we figured, okay, well, step number 1 is a box set. Step number 2 is using the digest size format rather than the letter size format, so that you can have whichever little book you need in front of you instead of a larger type of book, and then doing supplements to it, because we've never really done house rules for it, and then doing modules and resources and stuff that you can put into your box. And that was sort of the idea of, okay, so this is more the physical approach that we're going to take from now on with Swords and Wizardry. So it's it's more than a reprint. It's definitely kicked off by the fact that we need a reprint, though. So
perfect. Now, you created Swords and Wizardry 2008, I want to say 2006.
Yeah, I mean, so I was writing it in 2007, and it came out in 2008.
And what made you want to write Swords and Wizardry? Okay, the impetus, if you will.
We go all the way back now to 2005 when we were doing Osric. Myself and Stuart Marshall, and I wrote probably about 85% of the first book, and then he I handed it off to him. He edited that, finished it off, and then later, once the demand came in at a wild rate, he put that together into a more playable form. The first one that I came out with was just more of a sort of SRD to let people publish stuff for advanced D&D. And so, you know, Osric 2 comes out, and a lot of people are playing it because at that point there weren't any PDFs of the Wizards of the Coast stuff. Sorry, there weren't any PDFs from Wizards of the Coast of the original books. And so the only way of getting a PDF that wasn't pirated was to use Osric and so on. So it was very popular. And the guy, we produced that at a website called, at a forum called Knights and Knaves. And the guy who ran the forum, Jerry Mapes, he was very, very sick, you know, basically sort of deathbed situation. And he played original D&D. And he said, you know, it would be really, really cool if you came out with one of these for original D&D. And I had sort of sworn that I would never do another one after Osric, just because of the effort that was involved and all of that stuff. But
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
Yeah. So, but you know, he was a good friend. He's obviously, you know, passed away now. And so it was kind of a deathbed request type of thing to do this. I would love to say it was, you know, because I love the game and so on and so forth. But really, the thing that got me out of the starting box on Swords and Wizardry was because of that. You know, so that was what started it out. And I took the approach on that one of the things that I felt was kind of holding Osric back was that people weren't seeing a company behind it that was supporting it. And that's just a psychological thing, I think, but it is important to a lot of people, the idea that there's a central kind of thing. So I did that with Swords and Wizardry. And then funnily enough, Bill and I called each other on the same day. I think he called me about 2 hours before I was going to call him. So, you know, tremendous coincidence there about the idea of working together on Swords and Wizardry. And it really sort of took off from there. We decided we were going to do one that covered all of the supplements, you know, plus the stuff that was in the strategic review and the Dragon magazine, because I hadn't done that. What I had done was one that was a version of just the white box only, and one that was sort of my preferred version of OD&D at that time, which was the original books, but with the Greyhawk addition to it, because that was a real watershed, the Greyhawk supplement. And so we went all out on it to just get the complete version of Swords and Wizardry of OD&D as it existed right at the moment when they released Advanced D&D. So
awesome. All right, so I mean, I'm not going to go through what Swords and Wizardry is. It's an old school rule system. It's one that allows for a lot more interpretation by the game master or dungeon master and the players. It doesn't have a rule for every single little situation you ever are possibly going to have. And that's not to downplay what 5th edition or 3rd edition or Pathfinder or any of those editions that have a lot more rules crunch to them. I mean, this is just I prefer an old school system. I mean, it's what I grew up on, which kind of leads me into this question here. How and why, because I find this fascinating, how did you just even get started playing Dungeons and Dragons in the first place?
I was really, you know,
everybody's got a story.
No, I mean, it's not a super exciting story because it's the same one that almost everybody else has. It was, I mean, it was in the stores. Picked up a copy of the basic set, started playing it. You know, I had a little bit more background into gaming stuff just because I was really young. Read The Lord of the Rings, you know, when I was like 7 or 8, you know, super young, and got into Napoleonic wargaming, and then there started being little figures out there for Lord of the Rings wargaming. So I would go into these hobby and model stores, you know, which are gone now, but there used to be stores where you could buy balsa airplanes and rocket engines for model rockets and you know, model kits and things like that, and went into those to look at the minis.
We still have one.
Okay, well, that's
still have. It existed when I was 6 years old, and it's still run by the same guy today. It's called Hobby Hut, and we still have one in Fargo, North Dakota.
That's cool.
Which I think,
yeah, there are not a lot of those left around anymore. They got replaced by comic book stores for the most part. But so anyway, that was, you know, I sort of just ran across it in a store more than anything else. So not a very exciting story.
No, that's, I mean, okay, but I mean, you had to have heard of it or something from somebody, right? I mean, because like my older brother came home, and I was like playing Atari or something, and my older brother came home and he started telling me about this fantastic game that he played, where him and his friends, they went into this cave, and somebody found this magic sword, and then there was this dragon they had to run away from. And I thought he was telling me about an Atari game, and I was just like, "Oh wow, is that for Atari?" And he's like, "No," and I was like, "What is it for, like the Intellivision, you know, or the Coleco or something?" And he's like, "No, dummy, it's not a video game. It's a game you play at a table with paper and dice." And I was just entranced with that one story of my brother talking about how he went into this cave and that adventure that he had. I immediately like told my mom I had to own whatever this was. I had no idea what it was, but I had to.
That's a better story. That's a better story than mine. I mean, mine has me being sort of a stupid little kid in a store, and I was reading the Monster Manual because it's a fascinating read. This is the first edition Monster Manual. Reading it, you know, with sort of the wargaming in mind, but I couldn't figure out what it was for because it was books, and so it must not be a game somehow because it's just books. You know, they didn't have dice there, or you know, and it wasn't until the basic set came out that I was like, okay, this has the same Dungeons and Dragons thing on it that this Monster Manual has, but this must be the game of what these books are. And it, you know, it took a while to get it all figured out, but this was a box and it had dice in it. You could shake it, you could hear the dice, you know, so that I understood what that was and got a copy of that.
Do you remember how tough it was to track down polyhedral dice at the very beginning?
Yes. Yeah, it really was.
I remember I lost my 8-sided die somewhere. Like I had no idea where it was, you know, and you know, it just got misplaced. And I was on like a trip with my parents, and I saw we were driving down the street in some little town in North Dakota, and it said something like, you know, like game store as we drove by, and I was like, oh my gosh,
stop the car.
and I went in there because I just wanted to see the game store, right? But then I walked in, and the guy had like extra dice, like they were like $1 a piece, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can finally get an 8-sided die, you know. So I had like my dice set was that classic kind of really ugly marbly yellow white thing, but then there was this one really blocky green 8-sided die, and I still have that die. I like look at that and I get happy when I see it. You know,
yeah.
Remember, I don't know what happened to the other ones to save my life, but I still have that blocky 8-sided die. So I mean, when you played it, then I want to know this: did you run the games more, or did you play as a player more when you started playing?
We first started playing, it was me and my friend Jim Hazeltine, and so since there were only 2 of us playing the game, we're sort of simultaneously the dungeon master and the players. We were like, okay, well, let's have a this here, and we would put it there, and then we would fight it. You know, it was sort of more of a cooperative thing. But normally, you know, sometime after that, I was the one that fell in. You know, when we had more people, I was the one that fell into the role of being the dungeon master more than a player.
Yeah, I remember like, I mean, because like I remember growing as a person who ran. I was the one who had all the books, so like they'd ask me to run the games because I knew how to do it. But I also remember like not having any clue what I was doing. I mean, I could read the number. Okay, you went to room 3. Room 3 has 2 orcs in it. Okay, now I know how that works. You know, but I had no idea how to, like, other than to like gleefully tell people they, like, you know, died because they failed a poison save. You know, I had no idea what I was doing. But I have fantastic memories of playing it, which I think not to segue back, but I think that's one of those things where I think that's why gamers of our age kind of gravitate towards an old school system, because we have those kind of warm and fuzzy feelings. But also, it's one of those things where it's the players at the table experiencing like that developed story, instead of having this kind of, I don't know, like rote. And this is not being negative towards that. I mean, play what you want to play, love what you want to love. But I mean, later editions now for me just seem to be very compartmentalized. It's like, we're going to do this now. Oh, and you want to heal, so you're going to do this, and so on and so forth. Whereas we just kind of let our minds just go crazy, back in the day. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to put that in, one of the differences when you're playing the later games where the rules are more defined for what you can do. You will hear often somebody say, "I'm going to take a dash action," whereas back in the day, when there was no such thing as a dash action incorporated into the rules of combat, it would be something more like, can I run like hell and get up to it? And it's just, that's, sort of the difference that, that you see in terms of the language that's used around the table. And I also think that the older school style tends to be more immersive because of that. And it's because there's something not there in the rules rather than something that is placed in the rules to create a system. But not having something can have a qualitative effect on what happens around the table. It's really that quantitative difference in the rules creates an actual change in the way that it plays. And that's one of the, sort of messages about it is, this is not an incomplete game. You have to get your head into the idea that there are fewer rules for things. But it's not incomplete. It's that you're playing around that, and there is a definite result in the feel at the gaming table of what it is you're doing that, is definitely different.
So, somebody's calling you.
Yeah, hang on just a second. Let me mute this. It's probably Bill. Hang on a sec.
When he says Bill, he's the CEO of Frog God Games. Was it Bill?
It was not, but it was someone from Frog God.
Perfect. So here's my response to that. I will say this: there were still, in the old school Dungeons and Dragons games, there were still lots of rules. I think we as kids just kind of forgot that they existed in many situations. Like everybody always joked, nobody ever figured out encumbrance. I mean, there were definitely people that did, but nobody really worried about it. Nobody was like, how many coins am I carrying? Okay, how much weight do I have? Or also movement, like you mentioned your thing. I take a dash action. It was more of like, can I get to him this round? And the DM would say, yeah, you can get to the wizard. And that was like the decision, that kind of thing. I think it was like we didn't want to. For me, anyway, I knew where the fun stuff was.
It looks like Lance may have lost. I think you lost your. You froze on the screen for a couple seconds there.
Oh,
at least on mine.
So for me, well, no, it happens, but no. So probably the blizzard or something. No, but it was like one of those things where I knew where the fun rules were. Like the spells were fun, the combat was fun, the monsters were fun. I just kind of forgot that the rest of the stuff existed because I didn't want to get bogged down in like big. I mean, rolling for the treasure was fun. It's like, oh yeah, let's see how many thousands of coins we would get. And like the treasure types and all those things. And like I said, I definitely my daughter plays Dungeons and Dragons in a group. I play occasionally with her 5th edition D&D, and it's a fine system. I don't mind it at all. Actually, 5th edition to me has a lot of its beginnings. It kind of pays homage in a lot of ways to old school stuff, and I kind of enjoy it more than like 4th edition or 3rd edition.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think that when they wrote 5th edition, I think they took a look at, by then the OSR, the old school Renaissance, was in full swing, and I think that they looked at a lot of the stuff that people were saying in that community and worked some of it into 5th edition. So it backtracked from that sort of comprehensive granular rule system that you had in 3rd edition. And brought in some of the stuff that people were saying about that. So I think it's definitely much more. I mean, if you want to label stuff, with old school or not, then I think it's much more old school than the 2 editions that preceded it.
Yeah. So when you play, and I'm assuming you still play a fair amount.
Oh yeah.
When you play, do you play with a map and miniatures moving around, or do you theater of a mind type of thing?
All right. Well, in a small home game, I play with a battle mat a mini for everybody, a couple of markers for the monsters, or possibly the correct monsters, and a couple of very low walls that I made with Hearst Arts that are they would be 1 inch tall, basically, and they're just little segments of it, almost like Legos, because the only real reason that I use the miniatures for, it's not to create a visual impression of a dungeon for people, because I think people do imagine something much more powerfully when there is nothing to look at. But I do use it for situations like, here is the tactical situation that you are looking at around the door, and it's to figure out, who gets hit by the fireball, and it's just, it handles those particular areas where it's useful to know where everyone's relative location is to something. But I don't really use big stuff when I'm running an online game. The ones I was doing for the YouTube channel were very miniatures intensive, but that was because I was running a little camera through an actual dungeon terrain setup so that people could see that in operation, and that was just sort of spectacle. It's bread and circuses. However you want to view that, but it added some punch to that. When I'm running a convention game, it's pretty much entirely theater of the mind. I've usually got a whiteboard where I'm sketching out, marching order. But really most of the whiteboard is I put people's names around the table, because my convention games can have as many as, I've had as many as 25. That was too many, but, around 20 people, I can run a game of Swords and Wizardry, because it's so, streamlined and simple. And 20 people, if you've got miniatures out there, you've got 20 different hands trying to get in there and show where people's miniatures are, and it's difficult for people to see because you're more spread out. And so, the whole, that's theater of the mind. There's absolutely no way, even if I wanted to, you wouldn't be able to use miniatures in a game like that. So not at conventions, that's entirely theater of the mind.
How do you run a game with 20 people? I mean, I can remember sometimes when there was an old Gamers Guild hobby group, and this is back when I was in junior high, there'd be people running a 10 or 12 person D&D game, and that was just complete and total chaos. I couldn't believe they were able to run it. How is that even possible with 20 people?
Well, you first of all, you got to slough off all of the advanced D&D stuff, because that's a much more complicated system than original D&D, and that I could never run with anywhere near that many people. OD&D, the way I do it is I use a phased initiative system, because original D&D didn't have an initiative system that worked with the game, and so people picked them out. One of the ones that people used was a phased initiative system that's much more like a war game. It's first missiles, then either movement or melee, and then the other one, and you would go around doing just specifically the stuff. So I'm going around the table saying, okay, is anybody using spells, missiles, or turning? Spells, missiles, or turning? Spells, and people, yes, I'm doing a such and such, and around, and I'm like, okay, now we're, who's moving? You moving, and so people get to interact. There's much more gap. Much less gap in between one person talking and the next person talking, and then the next person talking, and so everybody gets to participate with stuff on a much more frequent basis than they would if you were using an advanced D&D system, where people pretty much all go, they do all of their characters' actions at one time, and everyone's waiting. Okay, now next person, such and such. So here it's running around the table much more quickly, and and people, once they realize it's having a method, and then people realize, okay, this is the method that we're using, and then I've never had any problem with anybody, trying to grandstand or anything like that. You occasionally, when people are planning things or are working on how to figure out with a trap or a puzzle or something like that, sometimes I'll divide them into two groups and, pick you're the coordinator for this group, you're the coordinator for this group, figure out what your group's solution is, and then we'll talk about, what happens. So, dividing groups up occasionally. I have a lot of repeat players. I mean, probably in any convention game I run, 75% of the people have already played in this game, and they're coming back. And so those people already know how things are going to work in it, and I use those folks to help coordinate when there is extra coordination needed. And so, there's a bunch of little tricks to running a game that are that large. I don't use a caller. I've had a lot of people ask if I use a caller. I've never liked having a caller because it puts one person being way more important than the other players that are in the group. And so, but I do use, one person or another simply to be a quick ad hoc group leader for figuring out what it is. They're a coordinator for ideas, and it's broken up into groups, and then they come back. So
for people that don't understand what the caller is, there was actually suggestions in the old school, like one person is the only person that tells the DM what is the party is doing. So the party can discuss and they can say anything they want, but until the caller actually turns to the DM and says, "This is what we're doing," no actions take place. And it was just kind of a way to funnel those ideas into one spot.
Which
I got go ahead.
No, it has its benefits, but I don't like the result of that on the way the game.
Oh no, you end up with a general type of situation. Like you definitely have depending upon the person that takes on that role, you can end up with that one person kind of taking over everything, and then it doesn't allow for kind of like the wider variety of options and groupthink. And I now have a giant Siberian Husky that wants love, apparently. Oh yes, how's it going? This is Ivan. He is only 6 months old, and he is huge. I've never had a Siberian Husky. I always wanted one. And I got him for my birthday.
My dog is even larger than that, but he had his breakfast and is now conked out on the floor over next to me. So there's no way he's going to pop his head up. In some of the games I've done, you've suddenly had this great big dog head come in, from the side, looking in, because he's literally that big. You see the head sort of come in like this.
What kind of dog is he, if you don't mind me asking?
It's called a Leonberger, but we're talking a dog that's about the size of a Saint Bernard. It's a snow rescue dog, like a Saint Bernard.
Oh, I think I've actually heard of that dog before.
Mm.
I don't think I've ever seen one live and in person. So way back in the day, and I just want your opinion on this. Way back in the day, there seems to be the DM was seen as more of a confrontational player at the table.
I think you're starting to cut out again.
Because that when I'm getting, yep, no, I'm back. But so the Dungeon Master was seen as an antagonist at the table. Now, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. Now it's seen as more of a collaboration, and we're going to do it together. Person that kind of behind the screen still, that is hiding some of that information. What's your thoughts on that? What do you prefer? Do you, the killer DM? Were you a killer DM when you played way back in the day?
No, I mean killer DMs suck. So we'll write that off right away. That's it's not a type of game that's fun to play at all. However, I think what the productive version of what you're describing is the idea of somebody who is fair in terms of all the resolutions, and they're not trying to kill the players, but they trash talk as if they are. Oh. And that sort of reminds the players, and they should also know that it's all in fun, or else it's they think they're playing with a killer DM. But when it is just this sort of I'm gonna you guys are just probably not going to survive here. I mean, with this corridor, no, not going to happen. And with that, what it does is it increases the tension. And so I think that there's a definite approach, and I agree, it's probably an older one, because I have had a lot of younger players say that they're not entirely comfortable with the way that works out, but the trash talk works out. But what it does is it's a technique for increasing tension, and everyone knows that it's fair, or should know that it's fair, but you've got this thing going where it increases the tension because they know that, if you do something wrong, your character may die, because it just in general, since it takes a lot less time to roll up a character, they tend to be a little bit more disposable in the older editions than they are in the later ones. So that, that's a dynamic that's out there. And I think that, And honestly, I think that third edition D&D was designed more for an oppositional type of thing, because they had rules on the DM, which you really didn't have in earlier editions. And those rules on the DM allowed you to play the game in a much more head-to-head kind of fashion, because since there were rules for both sides, if you were within the rules, you know, the DM was trying to beat the player. So actually, I think that's actually, in terms of the reality of the situation, a better description of third edition than it is of the older school editions. And then fifth edition, again, is, I think, back to the idea that the DM does have a lot more DM fiat, as it's often called, than you know, fewer rules on the DM. But again, it's coming from a different social context. I mean, it's an absolutely different generation. They're bringing different a different view of fantasy to the table. They're bringing a different view of social interactions to the table, and so you get something that looks different than the way that we did it, you know, back in the 70s and the 80s. But it's still it's the same thing in terms of the rules. It's the idea that the DM is making a lot of decisions on the fly, and that and they're expected to be fair and not a killer DM. I mean, killer DMs is a concept that sucks in any edition.
So, I mean, this is the old lady of the group. She's a mutt. She's like 13. She saw that I was scratching a dog, and she's needed some attention too. But I gotta ask. So, I mean, I can remember going through stages of, like, you know, being excited when, like, hey, poison saber die, you know, and like that kind of a thing. And then I remember, like, third edition. One of the biggest things in third edition, in my opinion, was like the advent of so much healing, like being available for players. So like it was just easier for players to stay alive. You know, and then I remember, like, then it just became almost like it seemed almost like not kosher to actually kill a PC. It was just kind of like, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, to this day, like I didn't mind that. But also, one of the things I love about old school was that the fact that it was like, oh, well, I mean, you need to be scared of the cave. You can't just be like, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, a game needs tension, and you know, there's no question about the fact that you need to have some tension. Maybe it's not done by killing characters. That's certainly, you know, one way to do it. It's a way that I think makes the game the most interesting. But you know, that was one of the things where something emerged from the rules that probably people didn't quite expect. Was it just took so long to make a character, you know, again in third edition, that it kind of was you know, killing off a player character. That means this player is out. You know, you're playing, you know, at best once a week, probably one every 2 weeks, and now they're going to spend 40 minutes out of the game session doing nothing but writing up a new character, and that, you know, sort of sucked. And so I think that's really where that came about, the idea that you shouldn't really, you know, kill all the way a character. But I think that really led to a reduction in tension, which led to a game that certainly for me didn't play as well.
Yeah, and I think that's still. I mean, it's and once again, play what you love and love what you play. I mean, I'm not finding fault with anything, but even with fifth edition, with all the different options you go through, all of the, you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to take, you know, this particular attribute and this trait and all these things. You tend to, instead of like growing into a character, you've already like built up what the character is going to be. When I get to second level, I'm going to do this. When I get to third level, I'm going to do this. And when you have all that, which for me, it's like I like growing into the character, like aging them as I play them. And so, like, you know, they're so much more than a few numbers on a page. And that's what I like about Swords and Wizardry and playing an older school set of rules. But I can understand why people like to create the character too. I mean, I remember making Pathfinder characters that were like really, really powerful and like being able to really, really affect the game world that you had. But also, I mean, so there's different roles. I mean, there's different situations. What do you play when you're not playing Swords and Wizardry or a D&D game? What do you play?
I mean, really, I'm a D&D player. I'm not super omnivorous in terms of rule systems, because go to play the fantasy as opposed to the game. But other systems that I like, you know, my other two go-to systems, if I had to pick them, and some of them I haven't played for years, would be Call of Cthulhu and Traveller.
I was just gonna say that if I had to guess, I was gonna put you on those two because, again, those are games that like we grew up with. I mean, yeah. I at that time. What about non-role playing games? Do you play any board games? Do you play anything like? Are you a Luddite? I mean, do you get online? You mentioned you ran a game online. Do you play any computer games or anything like that?
Yeah, I do play computer games, but once again, you know, we were talking about technology getting ahead of us. The last computer game that I was playing was Railroad Tycoon, which I think was like 2004. So you know, and I like Civilization for computer games. I don't have enough people to really play board games. You know, in terms of people who live at the house, because that used to be with the kids, and there's only one of the kids who's still living here. So,
I see my son. My son, the one thing he wanted for Christmas more than anything, he wanted a VR helmet, you know, and when I give him VR time, he's just in a completely different world, and he's having conversations with the people in that world that aren't even real, you know, but and it's fascinating. I'll put on the helmet every once in a while, but after about 45 minutes, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's enough of that. You know, yeah. I'm just like, you know, going to the weird world was fun for a while, but now I'm gonna like come back and ground myself in reality. To wrap up, I mean, where do you see? I mean, you know, being we're the old school codgers that we are, where do you see not only Swords and Wizardry, but also role playing has become huge again? I mean, I'm sure you recognize that. I mean, it's like board games were huge, like and are still very, very big and very, very important, but I think they kind of had a zenith, or they're at the top of that hill, and it's the gradual slow decline maybe happening where they'll even out in a plateau. But role-playing games are kind of, you know, behind them a little bit, and now it seems like with this influx of like celebrities playing D&D, and like it's becoming more of a like, I don't know, the zeitgeist or whatever. It's like it seems to be ramping up. Where do you see Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games going in like the next 5 years?
We're talking about the mainstream versions.
Well, mainstream, but also Swords and Wizardry, and just like role-playing as a whole. Because it seems like if you go like on the Kickstarter right now, I don't know if you knew this, but Kickstarter, if you search Zine Quest right now, ZINE Quest, there are tons of old, like they do this once a year. This is the second year they've done it, where there's tons of these like very, very old school like rules, like basically like so a zine, and you knew what they are, but I mean, like the zine were these like mostly self-published by some guy in a basement. Like he would write up some stuff, and I still have a bunch of them that I had that I picked up at conventions or through like my gamers guild that I had in my local town. And now these people are like basically they come up with, they write something for an RPG, and they print these things off. Maybe 500 copies of them will exist ever, and they send them out. And so I mean it's ramping up. People are getting excited about role playing games again, which I think is really, really cool. But I mean, I guess I'd just like to see where you think it's going to go. Well, I'm attacked by this husky for a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's really, really hard to say. Mm-hmm. I think that role-playing games are going to continue in popularity for quite a while. But, you know, once again, like, I think you have to look at games of whatever type, because there's collectible card games, there's there's tabletop games, you know, the Monopoly ilk, and then there's the role-playing games. And I do think that they kind of move in cycles, and it's affected by, you know, how close are people together, which generations are aging. I think it's, you know, stuff that almost sound like market analysis more than anything else are things that affect that. You know, presumably Wizards of the Coast is working on a 6th edition. I think that's probably, you know, certainly at this point would be a dumb idea to come out with it, because of the popularity of 5th edition, and they're still getting lots of more customers. But, you know, presumably somewhere they are working on, you know, what they would want to do for a 6th edition, because whenever you come out with a rule set that's a guaranteed source of money, you know, with it, like the, you know, this, even the Swords and Wizardry box set that we're coming out with now, which is really only because it's a restock. There are no changes to the system, and yet the Kickstarter, took off way faster than we thought it was going to. When you come out with a rule set, you make more money than you do on your supplements. Just period. That's the way it works. And so they're working on one for sure. And as soon as they think the 5th edition is stumbling, they will probably come out with that. So that, where do I see it coming? I think it's a wave that's going to keep going for a long time, but not forever.
Okay. And what's new or what's next for you, Matt? What are you going to create next, or what are you going to write next? I mean, what do you got percolating in your brain?
Well, I mean, right at the moment, I'm writing the adventure that's going to go with the Swords and Wizardry thing, because I came up with a cool idea for that. I've got the map, I've got the background, which are the two things that I do first, and then now it's just a matter of filling in the stuff that's in the map. So that's the immediate first thing. I'm also working with a 3D printing company where I sort of draw sketches and have the ideas for what kind of things we're going to want to do. And then somebody else is the sculptor for that. And so working on that. And I think a lot of it is probably going to be coordinating and writing for the supplements that come out for the Swords and Wizardry in this new Swords and Wizardry line, because there's one new thing in there, which is the idea of little house rules books that people can pick and choose house rules from. So
Fred Daniel just posted. You wanted to say that. Well, you can read it yourself right there.
It's up in front of me, and wants to thank me for the work, and I really I appreciate it, Fred, because you get the internet does occasionally provide praise for things, but mostly what it provides for stuff is people who are not happy with what you do. So it's always great when somebody comes in and says, when you get the stories of this is what it did and it was good, as opposed to you missed a comma on page 5. So
that comma, it would have been perfect if it wasn't for that comma.
And I will say I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma. Let's just get it out of the way. I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma.
Well, I think more people should be. I think the Oxford comma is a necessary addition. And if you don't know what we're talking about, Google it, and then you'll know.
Yeah, because it's not important.
Yeah. So I'll just ask one last thing, and then I'll let you go.
Okay.
Favorite module, favorite old school TSR module that like you can still pick it up and read it today, and you'd be like, oh, this is great.
I gotta say, and again, it's a boring answer. It's B2 Keep on the Borderlands.
Well, that's tons of people say that. That's not a boring answer. It's so perfect. It's just it's like it's the perfect. Hey, here's your town. You get to leave and you're gonna go and muck around in these caves until they beat you up so bad you have to run back.
Yeah.
And head back. I mean that it's still run in conventions now. I mean, like it is a I mean, and they'll hide it by calling it the Caves of Chaos or something like that. They'll but I mean it's still it's a wonderful design. It's almost in both its complexity and simplicity. It's almost like the perfect module. Really
and that's the thing, is it's kind of a perfect capsule of it. It's less innovative and than a lot of the ones that are out there. It's less creative than a lot of the ones that are out there. But when you're sitting down to play a game, that is my favorite module, I think, because it simply does everything well, without having one thing that it does super well, but other things that it does really poorly. And it just draws the whole, this is what this game is about at its basic level, into one place. And so that, it's a hard decision to make which one's the favorite, but I got to go with Keep on the Borderlands.
The first time I ever played Dungeons and Dragons, I was a fighter, and I killed an acolyte, and I still to this day remember. I still to this day. I was killed later, but I remember killing that acolyte and being very proud of myself that I did so. And I think I was 7 years old, and but that was a pretty momentous moment for me. I still have that guy's character sheet somewhere. I don't know. It's like lost in my own personal archives.
Yep.
But well, Matt, thank you for taking the time this morning. If you made it this far through the video, I know we mentioned it at the very beginning, but go to Kickstarter. There's a link in the description on the YouTube. You can, if you're interested in diving into the old school rules revival, the Renaissance, if you will, you can go ahead and check out that link. There's still like 3 weeks left on the campaign, so there's still plenty of time to get in, and you can cut yourself off a little piece of both. Like it's an old school rule set, but it's definitely one that it's of the rule sets out there for the old school games. It's the one I play, and it's the one I happily endorse to anybody who wants to dive in. Any last words there, Matt?
Yeah, I do my tagline. There's probably a lot of people waiting for the tagline.
Okay, and go.
All right, so whatever type of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.
Ah, I like that. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate your time today.
All right.